going to align your entire organization around one source of buyer truth. There's going to be no quibbling. You're going to have one highly credible, robust source of buying insights that everybody is going to trust. So you'll be able to rally and all kind of go in the same direction because of it. One of the things I enjoy the most about this work is you see that happening.
The Industrial Growth Institute podcast connects you with the big thinkers, makers, and subject matter experts across all aspects of an integrated B2B industrial revenue growth function. From strategy, board oversight and transactions, through all the phases of manufacturing marketing, the complexities of industrial sales, and the nuances of marketing and sales technology and customer experience, I speak with guests who bring insights, innovative perspectives, best practices, and twists on traditional approaches. Each episode explores high-level thinking and in-the-weeds actionable tactics. If you enjoyed these discussions, then please help me out by liking and sharing the podcast, and especially by leaving a comment and giving a review. So with no further ado, let's jump into this episode. Hi there, I'm Ed Marsh, host of the Industrial Growth Institute podcast. Welcome to this episode. I love a lot of Mark Twain quotes, and among them, I think my favorite may be, it ain't what you know, or it ain't what you don't know that gets you into trouble, it's what you know for sure that just ain't so. And in my experience, industrial manufacturers know a lot of things for sure that may be just ain't so. And I often hear things like, our buyers are different. They don't use the internet. Yeah, yes, I still hear that today. In fact, I heard that last Friday. But there's no way that we can effectively market and sell if we don't understand what our buyers think and how they buy. And simply projecting the way we'd like them to based on what we like to talk about doesn't actually solve for that, and it doesn't help us. That takes buyer research. And buyer research is a really big and complex topic. And today, I'm excited to be joined by an expert in that space. Jim Kraus is the president of the Buyer Persona Institute and a principal of Knowledge Systems and Research, Inc., which is a leading global market research and consulting firm. Jim has decades of experience leading research teams and developing growth strategies through, good research-based decisions, and he's held executive-level roles at G500 technology and financial services firms. He speaks on this topic. He's co-written the latest edition of the Buyer Persona book with Adele Ravella, and he's known as a leading expert on buying decisions and the people who make them. So please be sure to share this episode with colleagues who will benefit from it. Leave a comment, like, and, of course, subscribe. And with that, thank you so much for joining me today, Jim.
Hi, Ed. So great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I appreciate you making some time. All right. I want to really level set to start out. Your background from your bio, it's primarily working in tech and financial services. The audience for this podcast is folks in the industrial manufacturing space. So a common question that I get, is something along the lines of, but does this apply to traditional industries like industrials? So start us off with some context on that.
Yeah, I think the most important thing is everything that we do at Buyer Persona Institute and the methodology that we're going to get into today, I'm sure, is really focused on understanding high consideration buying decision, having a really forensic understanding of if a quote unquote buyer is making a buying decision or a purchase decision in any industry, and it involves a high consideration purchase where they're probably looking at multiple options. There's probably multiple stakeholders that are involved in that decision. There's probably some risk that's involved. They're really anxious about making the right decision and not making the wrong decision. Everything that we're going to talk about today around buying insights and buyer persona research is really focused on understanding these high consideration buying decisions, regardless of the industry. So for any of your kind of audience out there involved in these different markets, if you think about the folks that you're selling to day in and day out and you're marketing to day in and day out, if they're involved in a high consideration decision to select you or a competitive alternative, this will have a lot of relevance for them.
And I would think that's particularly applicable if we're talking about incumbent. A well-situated and entrenched incumbent, we're talking about trying to knock them out, a knockout play, perhaps as part of the battle card or the playbook. The old saying, nobody got fired for buying IBM. If you're an engineer or decision maker in an industrial manufacturer with 5 of a competitor's machines on your manufacturing line, there's a lot of downside to selecting a different one for your 6th machine. I mean, if it works out really well, you get an attaboy. If it works out poorly, you get a new job.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think one of the things that I often talk about in these forums is to really put yourself in the shoes of the buyer, right? We're so focused on marketing and selling and talking at our audience. And the great place to start is just with a full dose of empathy, right? Like put yourself in your buyer's shoes for a moment and think about what they're really looking for, right? I mean, they're looking for things, right? But what they're really looking for is the security and the confidence that what they're going to purchase is going to give them the outcomes that they need. And also nothing's going to get quote unquote messed up, right? You're not going to make a bad decision. If you put yourself in the shoes of the buyer in that way, you really start to understand like what are the things that we really know to give these buyers the assurances they're looking for, because that creates the win-win opportunities you're really looking for.
And you also talked about outcome, and we're obviously going to talk about the 5 elements of a good buyer persona. Mm-hmm. But the outcome is something that I find so many companies just miss. They're so focused on talking about what they do and trying to, they think about matching that to what they believe to be the buyer requirements, but it's all focused on technical features and attributes as opposed to this is how your business changes. You make more or save more, basically some flavor or some variation of that at the end of the day.
Right. Absolutely. And the outcomes really are there's in 2 major buckets. The outcomes are whatever the important things that a buyer is trying to achieve with this particular purchase, whether it's financial, operational, cultural, what have you. And then the other side of the equation, as we're starting to talk a little bit about, is addressing some of the fears and concerns they have. So they feel confident that they are actually going to get those things in the first place. So both sides are important.
All right. So Adele's first edition came out, I think, in 2015. Your new collaboration, the revised and expanded edition, came out in 2024. Why? And I'll drop a link in the show notes for the Amazon link to buy the book. Why was it time for an update?
One, I think just from, the last edition had been done 10 years ago. And obviously, a lot has changed in the last 10 years. A lot has stayed the same, but a lot has changed as well. So from just a pure, it's been 10 years, it was kind of time to really take a fresh look at everything and make sure that everything that was in the original book was still relevant and current. Mm-hmm. The other reason that we wrote it is there's 2 things that we really wanted. There's really 3 things we wanted to kind of add to this version. One is talk a little bit more about a buyer persona framework that's a little bit more impactful and actionable than the kind of role-based personas that a lot of people are focused on. We wanted to add a little more there so people could really understand why that's so important. The second thing we wanted to add is more detail about how do you actually execute buyer persona research? What are some more tips that we can give people? What are some examples of deliverables that we put in? We put tangible examples of actual buyer personas in the book so that you can kind of touch and feel it a little bit more. And you also know a little bit more about how do you execute one of these studies. And I think the third reason that we did the update is we wanted to add more about what do you do with these insights when you get them, right? So this is designed to really help marketing, sales, and product people. But we learned a lot from our clients over the last 10 years. And we want to impart some of that knowledge and some of those lessons learned that we picked up with our clients into the book as well.
Yeah, one thing that jumped out at me as a difference is this framework for a messaging workshop. So in other words, how you take the outcome of the buyer persona and actually translate it into sales and marketing messages that will be impactful. And we're going to talk about that. Obviously, AI is a piece that we need to talk about as well that's changed in the past 10 years. But to your background, you've been in market research for 25 years, as about 15 on the client side and now 10 on the agency side. Well, give us the quick version of your career, how you ended up going into research and why you stayed in it and what your perspective is now.
Yeah, I mean, the main reason I got into research years ago now, and it may even be pushing 30 years at this point, it's been a while, is just a passion for understanding, just an innate curiosity, kind of just innate in me. And it really fascinated me to try to understand markets, understand customers, understand prospective buyers in a way that could really deliver insights that really helps organizations and people in their own professional careers make better decisions, right? To have better outcomes for their organizations. And one of the things I noticed early on when I first started was that a lot of what I thought there was a fair amount of quote unquote bad research going on. Not that it was poorly done, but there wasn't a tight linkage between quote unquote doing research and how is it actually going to inform and help you make better business decisions, right? So that's always served me well when I was on the client side working for larger organizations, as well as quote unquote supplier side helping companies. because making that magic happen, that intersection between insights and actual helping businesses is just really cool. It's kind of it's almost a drug for me, right? I really enjoy it. So it's been a natural fit. So I think that was a real good fit for me. And I think the other thing is just I've been involved in a lot of qualitative and quantitative research. I enjoy both. So that's been nice too. I've had a kind of a very varied research career, been involved in a lot of different things. And, finally getting to the Buyer Persona Institute and leading this organization is a great fit because everything that we do is maniacally aligned to developing insights that are going to help you make much more informed decisions and allow you to really connect with your buyers in a very meaningful way. And that's just a perfect fit for me. So
I think you mentioned that you'd seen research that perhaps was not as impactful as it could have been along the way. And one of the things that clearly jumps out in this version of the book is a lot of discussion around how to introduce these concepts to your colleagues from other departments. If marketing kind of owns it, then how do you discuss it with sales? And how do you discuss it with management? Because they probably have experienced quote unquote research before that was vacuous or didn't have an impact. And so they may be jaundiced against it.
Right. Yeah. I think the biggest hook on all of this stuff, this type of buyer persona research that we'll talk a little bit more about, is that it's all focused around a buying decision, right? That is the center of the universe, right? I mean, at the end of the day, what we're trying to do as marketers and sellers and product people is we are trying to develop and offer products in the marketplace that we think will add tangible value to buyers and that they're going to want to buy, and that they get value from them. That's their win. We get value in the compensation that they provide us, right? We're looking to make that perfect marriage, that perfect linkage. So one of the things here about, talking to colleagues, I think a lot of times, which is helpful, is talking to them about that and having them actually pause and say like, hey, wait a second here. Like, we're not just doing research for research. What questions are we really trying to have answers for? Because a lot of people, when they go into research, they don't have the questions really formed. Like, what do we really need here? Right. I think that's where there's a disconnect sometimes between research and wasted investment in research. The other thing too is, and we've got it a lot in the book, is, a lot of times we'll often hear that people in an organization will say, well, we already understand our buyers, or we already understand our customers already. And then, we've got certain tools to basically say, well, do you really, really understand them? And what happens is, what we'll do is we'll actually do mock interviews sometimes with, like, let's say a sales leader, and say, hey, there's all these questions that we have where if we had these insights, it would really help you do your job even better. Can we agree on those? They'll look at them and say, yeah, if we knew this, great. So let's kind of run through an interview that I would do with you if you were a prospective buyer. And very quickly they realize, like, wait a second, maybe we don't know everything that we thought we knew. We know a lot, but we don't know everything that we need to know.
Yeah. And you talk a lot about assumptions and misinformation that exist around buyer profiles and buyer personas. I think the essence of this methodology that really appealed to me when I first learned about it, when Adele first was talking about it, is the fact that it's an engineered process. Yes, it's qualitative. Mm-hmm. Yes, it involves people interviewing, and that can be, that opens up a wide range of possibilities, because that's part of the point. There is an engineered process, which is very different, I think, than the way many marketers, even in industrial companies where they've got the back end of the business wired really tight with very specific process operations and continuous improvement and process engineering. But the front end, the way they do marketing sales, is much more ad hoc. And so I think it's refreshing to bring a very well-engineered process to what feels like kind of black magic.
Exactly. And the beauty of this is that it's very straightforward. It's very logical. I've never had a conversation with anybody about this buyer persona framework or the 5 rings of buying insight that I'm sure we'll talk more about. Nobody's ever said to me, oh, that makes no sense. That's illogical. We don't understand what you're talking about. The beauty of this is, like, some of the best things in life are simple, right? It doesn't have to be hard, but if you have a process and you have a framework that actually makes sense and you can apply it, it's amazing the magic that you can make happen, right? So this is, like you said, this is applying a process and a proven framework on the front end so that everything in marketing and sales that you're doing, you're just maximizing every dollar and every time spent, right? So I often talk to folks about marketing waste, and you think about how much time you spend on developing thought leadership and advertising and messaging and campaigns, right? Where, you might just be missing the mark a lot, or maybe just missing it a little bit, and you can tweak it. If you just knew a few things, Now, all of a sudden, you're just making all those resources work really, really hard for you.
So many companies invest so much in content marketing, talking about the things that they want to talk about.
Right.
And it's so close to working. If they would just shift the topics a little bit, then suddenly it would be functional and effective to the extent that SEO and content marketing is still effective. But it's such an important point, understanding what buyers want.
Yeah, buyers don't care about you. I'm sorry to deliver that information to everybody if that's a surprise, but if you write any type of content and messaging, we do this in the stuff we put out. Like we'll write something and literally I'll go through it and I'll be like, all right, is this literally talking about something that buyers are going to care, their world? And if it's not, it's probably wasted space. They don't care about you. They don't care about your product features, right? They care about how is this going to deliver value and help me accomplish something that's important to me, right? And important to my organization. So everything and one of the nice things about buyer persona is one of the things that doesn't appear in the box score is it forces you to think that way, because what you end up with is these deep insights about the buyer. And then all of a sudden you can't help but make the buyer the star of your show. So that's kind of like one of those things that it's a really nice benefit of doing this because it just shifts the focus a little bit to where it should be.
And it's a kind of a subtle point in the book, but I don't remember you saying this explicitly. You danced around in a couple of places, but it also becomes not only helps you market and sell more effectively, but it becomes a very effective point of differentiation. If you're speaking in a way that directly connects with buyers based on what's important to them, rather than just the vacuous pablum that sounds like so many companies in your space, that really makes a difference.
Yeah, they don't care about the high performing, best in class. It's just those are I always tell this anecdote. Years ago, I worked one of the organizations I worked for, and I was doing a presentation deck for an executive, and I did a first draft, and he came back and he's like, Jim, there's way too many 25-cent and dollar words in here. He's like, I need some nickel words. And what he meant was, and I've never lost this lesson, was, you need to talk to your audience in a way that makes sense to them and how they think about these things, right? You don't want to talk, because you'll just be lost in the abyss, right? The other really important point here that is around relevancy is one of the things you're going to get an immense amount of credit for is by doing this type of research and getting these insights ahead of time. It's not only the language that you speak, which is so critical, and what you're saying to them and how you're saying it to them, but the fact that you're essentially anticipating what those needs are, right? Because now they're going to go to we'll use a website as a very simple example. They go to your website, and if you talk to buyers, most of the time they'll say they'll go to your website because they just want to see like, okay, do I feel like this is an organization that could potentially help me? You're not going to sell them on your website, but you're like, okay, am I in the right ballpark here, right? And if you're hitting on all the key things that they want to need, and you're actually talking about their concerns proactively, they're going to be like, wow, this organization really gets me, right?
Sure.
You're going to get a call, right? You're going to right away, you're going to be like, oh, this is somebody we really need to talk to.
Right. All right. So this is not going to be a book review episode. I'll link to episode 498 of Douglas Burdett's marketing book podcast, as long as that remains posted and up. That's another conversation that folks can listen to, where you go a lot of detail into the book. We're going to talk more conceptually and, again, try to tie it back to industrial manufacturers. Certainly, the point you made earlier about complex sales is an important one. These high consideration, complex deals, long sales cycle, big ticket, large buying teams, significant implications for a mistake. I think that buying teams are maybe one of the things that's changed the most in the 10 years. I think 10 years ago, they were typically 4 or 5. Now, I've seen some stuff that shows on the technology side, they may be 15, 16. On the industrial side, they're probably 10 or 12. How has the growing buying team changed the premise of the buyer persona?
It's made the focus on the buying decision even more important, right? So if I could juxtaposition two types of buyer personas, the first type of buyer persona that a lot of people are familiar with really provides profile information around a specific role or individual involved in the buying decision, right? So if it's technology, maybe the CIO or a VP of technology is involved. Traditional buyer persona would have descriptive characteristics of those roles, like maybe the VP of IT is a certain age group, certain education, certain information resources they use, maybe even their overall priorities and challenges.
So psychographic kind of stuff.
Psychographic type of stuff. Now, the challenge with that from a buying committee perspective, as you said, when these high consideration buying decisions, you're going to have multiple influencers. For you to try to take those insights and tailor your approach each one of them is going to be too complex. You probably don't have the resources to do it anyway. And the biggest gap or drawback of it is you're not even really talking to them about the buying decision that you're trying to influence, right? So you're missing on all of those things, right? It's just woefully inadequate to help marketing and sales, those type of buyer personas. With the growing buying committee now, right, where you've got multiple influencers, and we're finding the same thing every day in the work that we do, all these folks, regardless of title, regardless whether it's IT or business or what have you, or support, non-support function, they're going to be gravitating around this buying decision, right? They're going to be going through steps in the process in terms of searching for competitive alternatives, coming up with requirements, looking and researching, evaluating those competitive alternatives, whittling down their choices and making a final decision. You want to understand the collective. If you have a forensic understanding of what's important to that buying committee, now you've simplified your marketing because you're not trying to market to 15 different people. You're giving them the exact information that they want, right, on this buying decision, because guess what? The VP of IT is probably making other buying decisions that are very different than this one. Guess what? What they care about is going to be vastly different most often, right? So that's one of the beauties of this thing, that kind of simplifies your marketing as well, and it focuses on the buying decision and the buying committee rather than trying to understand each individual and role, which isn't really going to help you that much.
And that also ties in with the jolt effect. You cite in the book the research that was done by the folks that wrote Challenger Sales some years ago. It came out a couple of years ago and took advantage of the shift during COVID from in-person sales calls to online sales calls that could be recorded and then transcribed and then evaluated using AI. And, there's this trend. Deals ending in the status quo are up. Deals that are dying due to indecision are up. You, I think, make the point that a well-crafted buyer persona can help preempt some of the fears and concerns and issues that may lead to deals ending in no decision. How do you see that working?
Yeah, so one of the key elements, I'm sure we'll talk about the key elements of a buyer persona, but one of the key things that you definitely want to have as part of your buyer persona is understanding all the fears and concerns that your buyers have about making this specific buying decision. So if you sell a widget, right, widget X, you want to know proactively ahead of time, what are their worries? What are they concerned about making a widget X purchase? Either overall, they might be concerned about making this investment with anybody, right, moving away from the status quo, or with certain providers. And the reason that's so important, connecting back to your mention of the jolt effect, which is a wonderful book by Matthew Dixon and Ted McKenna, where they literally analyze over 2 million sales calls between sales and prospective customers during COVID, was they found so much fear and indecision appear in so many different sales calls. And one of the key obstacles for sales professionals, any sales professional will tell you this, is when buyers make the dreaded no decision, right? Where they're not even going with a competitor, they're making indecision. Now, in the past,
up to 40% of deals now, I think.
Exactly. And in the past, sales professionals generally were trained to relitigate that sale, double down on here's the benefits.
Go back to the FOMO.
Correct. Exactly. Here's if you don't do this, you're not going to get this benefit, et cetera. And what they found was it's not that buyers are making rational choices and saying like, oh, what we're doing now is actually better than anything we're looking at. That's happening 40% of the time. Over half the time, what's happening is they're just really concerned / terrified that if they make this decision, something could go wrong, right? It could be that, let's say it's a technology purchase, for example. What if people don't use it, right? Don't use the technology, or what if it takes forever to get trained on it, or what if it doesn't provide the outcomes that they need, right? And so that paralyzes them. So if your buyer persona can identify all those fears and concerns in advance, which is a very achievable objective, by the way, you can now proactively address those with those buyers, so you can help your marketing and your sales professionals get past that hurdle. And the other thing too is if you serve that role and calm the fears of your buyers, now you enter that role of trusted advisor, right? Which is gold, right? Now they're going to really start leaning on you in terms of what to do, how to do it, et cetera.
Another contributor to the indecision that I think jumped out of me about the jolt effect is the fact that people are just simply overwhelmed with information. And that comes back again to the buyer persona, that if you understand what's important, you target them with messages and information specifically related to that. And that was relevant and meaningful. It's not just more stuff that they have to try to wade through that overwhelms them and makes them second guess their their decision, but rather it goes back to that point of reassuring them they're making the right one.
Yeah, because the one characteristic of these high consideration buying decision that we're talking about, whether it's a products or service or solution, or we're looking at multiple alternatives. If you put yourself in the shoes of your buyer, which again, I encourage you to do every moment of every day, what's going to happen is these are usually decisions that either the buyers either never made before, or they're probably not making very frequently, right? It's not like they're going out and buying a cereal every week, right? These are things that, so when they first start looking, they're going to be anxious, right? They may not know all the options that are available in the market, the different providers that are out there. They may not know all the different types of features, right? Like how am I even making this decision? Is it just these two features? Is it 7, this 10? Which one's most important? What do I care about, right? So all of this stuff is going on, and it's lending itself to a great degree of anxiousness, right? So if you understand what those things are and where they're anxious, and you're the person that can really calm those things, right, and make sense of all that information, where you say, hey, look, we're not going to fire hose you with this stuff. Right. Here's some things that we think might be important to you. And we want to talk about these things, right? And tell you about here's how kind of we deal with them and some of the successes we've had with other clients working through these issues. That's a different conversation. Now you take something that's anxiousness and you turn it into it's a win-win, right? Because you're helping them as well.
So I was going to ask you an easy question. I was going to ask you how a persona supports growth, but I think let's flip it around. Maybe the better way to ask it is, what are the common mistakes that companies make if they haven't invested in the proper kind of buyer persona? Certainly vomiting up a bunch of information that may or may not be relevant, but what other kinds of things?
I think the thing that we see the most often mistakes is not starting, and this is one of the things when I get a chance to talk at these type of things, or with different companies that we're advising or working with, is I always tell them to take a pause for a minute, especially marketers, and really think to yourself, what are the insights that I need? What is the information? However you want to think about it. Like, here's the things I need to do from a marketing function. What are the pieces of information I really need to do my job really well? One of the things is defining what your job is, right? Your job is to make your organization more aware of your organizational brand, get more consideration and more leads, help the sales team convert more business, all those types of things. So sit down and even jot it down. Like, what are the pieces of information you really need to know? What we find is, and I have a great deal of empathy for marketers, because a lot of times marketers in organizations, they're being asked to do so many different things, right? Like, oh, we need this thought leadership material out. We're updating our advertising. The sales team needs this deck, right? And they're on this hamster wheel that never ends. They never get a chance to really say, wait a second, what do we really need to do our job well, right? What do we also need to be able to say, hey, look, XYZ internal client, right? Maybe that's not a great idea, or maybe we should think about this, right? Because we have this research that tells us what these buyers want. So start with what questions that you really want answers to and what insights you really need. And then from there, then say, hey, now what can we go do to get those types of insights? Before we even talk about a buyer persona framework or anything like that, that's the thing I find most in need of a lot of organizations. They don't pause and just say, what do we need? Because what will happen is, going back to our conversation about profiling roles and individuals and psychographics, if you're being honest, that information has limited value. It just does, sure. Right? For a lot of the stuff, not everything, but for a lot of the stuff you're doing. So to say, well, if that has limited value, then there's got to be something that we need that would be more useful. Well, what is it? Right. Ask yourself that question and say, hey, look, let's go get it.
All right, let's talk about the mechanics of it. 5 key areas to explore. Talk about those 5 areas.
Yeah. So for a buyer persona, let's define what a buyer persona is, right? That's essentially what we're doing, right? So okay. a contemporary, modern, impactful buyer persona should inform just about every marketing and sales decision you make, right? So this should be a piece of work and insights that you're going to go back to again and again. It should not have a limited shelf life. It should be something that you literally rely on and say, hey, we're doing something in marketing. What does our buyer persona say? I mean, that's what this resource should be for you.
So it doesn't go on the shelf in a binder. No, this is something that's part of every meeting and discussion and decision and prioritization.
Yeah. In fact, I would even challenge you to put it on the shelf and not look at it. It's not going to happen, right? And this is why, right? So there's 5. We call it the 5 rings of buying insight. It's a name. We can call it whatever we want. We've been calling it that for 15 years now, so we'll stick with that. But take whatever buying decision you're trying to influence. So anybody, if your audience is out there, think about a product or a service solution. that you're trying to really kind of push in your organization. Maybe it's a new one. Maybe you're rethinking how you're marketing and selling it. Maybe you're entering a new market, what have you. But you're going to be doing some things to really kind of shape and influence buyers around this product or service, right? So there's 5 things that you really want to know about this buying decision that you're thinking of. The first one, the first ring of insight, we call priority initiatives. And what these are is simply triggers. These are, what are the things that are getting your prospects to start looking for a solution like yours in the first place? What is the proverbial thing that's getting them off the couch, where today is the day where they say, whatever we're doing before isn't working, or we don't have any capability, we need something new. But what are those things? What are the 3, 4, 5, maybe 6, 7 things that's getting them going? Why is that so important? Because you want to meet your buyers where they're starting, right? Going back to creating that trust and empathy. If you can start connecting with them early on where they're like, hey, they really get us, right? They're talking about all the reasons I'm even here in the first place, right? So that's the first one, priority initiatives. The second one...
And what changed today? I mean, because they probably had all those things for the last 6 months, but something happened today to make them actually undertake to do the work.
Exactly, right? Like, what was the tipping point, so to speak, right?
Right.
The second ring of insight we call success factors. And these are outcomes or benefits that buyers want, right? So what are the key things from this buying decision? And this isn't your features, right? This has nothing to do with maybe your features are an enabler of them, and that's fine. And you do want to be talking about those things. But before you can get to your products and services, what are the key outcomes that they really need from this investment to say, hey, you know what, this was worth it. We made a smart investment and we got the outcomes that we needed and we eliminated, anything we were concerned about. So what are those success factors?
Are those all organizational, or could they be individual as well?
Usually there'll be a combination of both. But we can talk about how you actually build one of these buyer personas, but you should be listening for both is my answer, right?
All right.
The third ring of insight we call perceived barriers. And that sounds like a negative one. It's actually one of my favorites because it's one of the best places to differentiate yourself. What perceived barriers are is these are the fears and concerns that buyers have that cause them to either, do the dreaded no decision where they're just afraid to make an investment with anybody, or there are certain things that there are concerns about certain providers, certain characteristics of providers, right? So simple example, maybe a barrier for technology purchase is, any organization that hasn't been around that long, we're a little concerned about because we're not sure they're going to have staying power and really invest in their product over the long haul. That could be a concern, right? As an example, right? So you want to know what those are, right? You don't want to be guessing at those. You want to know proactively, like, here's the 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 concerns my buyers are going to have. Like, just think how wonderful that would be to have that information as a market seller, like what you can do with that information to become a trusted advisor, really talk about your capabilities in a way that addresses them. Again, think about them. They don't care about you. They care about them. Fourth is decision criteria. That's the fourth ring of insight. And decision criteria is all the questions that you can expect your buyers to have when they're figuring out who are they going to consider as they winnow down their choices and as they make a final decision. What are the key criterion that they're going to make those types of decisions on? I always like to think about decision criteria. If you think about the traditional sales funnel, a lot of times decision criteria are the things that are in that middle end of the sales funnel where buyers are now getting smarter, right? They're now starting to look at what's out there. They're starting to ask questions, and all of a sudden things that didn't even come up early on, the triggers and success factors are all of a sudden important now because they're like, wait a second, that's pretty important. Or, oh my God, I need to think about that, right? Because they're getting smarter now, right? You want to know what those are, right? I mean,
and it feels like across the buying team, those will be different. The technical buyer is going to have a set of decision criteria. The financial buyer is going to have a different set of decision criteria, right?
Yep. And you want to know what they all are, right? You want to know in the totality for that buying decision, what is really going to be important, because they're all important for a number of reasons. Like maybe in the buying committee, when they're having their discussions about, who they want to go with, maybe it's the tech buyer that talks about IT security more, maybe not, but maybe that's the case. That's fine. But it's all relevant, right? It's all meaningful in whatever final decision they're making. The fifth and final ring of insight we call buyer's journey. And there's typically 3 components of buyer's journey that you really want to understand. One is, what are the steps in the process, right? So no buyer's journey looks exactly the same for any one buyer, but you can find out what are the major things that your prospective buyers do when it comes to this buying decision, right? And you want to know what those are because that helps you figure out where do I need to be and how do I need to be there in these different stages, and how do I give providers that confidence and assurance that they're craving at these different stages. The second part of buyer's journey is information sources that they use. So what are all the different places they're tapping into that are making them feel more knowledgeable, more informed, and hopefully more confident making that buying decision, whether it's word of mouth, advertising, conferences, events, thought leadership, et cetera, et cetera. You want to know what all those are and what are the ones they really lean on. And then the third and final one is who's involved in the process, right? Who's involved in that evaluation, that buying committee, buying center, however you want to call it. Who are the key influencers? What functions? What roles? So that you have an awareness of, these are the key people that you really need to influence. Now, if you step back from, go ahead.
It feels like a lot of the friction may come around that fifth ring of buying insight, this buying journey piece. I mean, if somebody has never used Reddit, doesn't know what Reddit is, and the persona interviews uncover the fact that a lot of the buyers are turning to Reddit for information, that's going to feel very foreign. And so we'll talk a little bit about direct quotes and the value of direct quotes to really convey the validity of that information as opposed to just some kind of an arbitrary concocted insight. Or we may think that demos are a critical step in the sales process, and the buyer may think the demo is just a waste of their time. It doesn't speak about the things that are important to them. So it feels like in many cases, this really challenges a lot of deeply held assumptions.
It can. It really depends. I would say for when we do readouts of personas with organizations that we partner with, I will say there's usually some surprises and there's some confirmations. And I would argue both are really valuable, right? In our world, confirmations of a preconceived notion is not a negative, because what always happens is it kind of stiffens up your spine and be like, okay, we've got all these motions going on here and we're making these investments here. Good. Let's keep going. We're on the right track. There's value in that. But there will also be things like you mentioned, Ed, right? Where it might be some source that's not even on your radar at all. And you're like, oh my gosh, we need to be there somehow, right? Because we're missing something totally. So they're both pretty important.
And the fundamental tool to get all this information is unscripted half-hour interviews that are really just conversations, right?
Correct. Yeah. So the way to get these insights, and there's no better way, there's other ways, there's no better way, is talking to recent buyers. And by recent buyers, what I mean is, let's put a definition around that, which is pretty important. A recent buyer is a buyer that has made the exact same buying decision that you're trying to influence, typically in the past 3 to 12 months, to put a time frame on it, right? So these are not just your current customers, right? So if you're selling widget X, to go back to that example, you don't just want to talk to widget X customers of your own company, right? That's a very limited view. These are people that already selected you. They're going to have biases, good, bad, or otherwise. You want to talk to people that have made that buying decision that may have never considered you or considered you and bought competitors, right? So you want to know all three types, because that's going to give you a complete, robust market understanding of your prospective buyers. And particularly if you're focused on new client acquisition, that's absolutely pivotal that you have that vantage point in talking to them.
You talked about how sales is often seen as the existing repository for a lot of this information, even though it's kind of limited and often projection of what's important to them. And the technique you suggest is to do a mock interview to, in a gentle, nurturing way, help them understand that maybe they don't have it all. How often do you find that you actually have to go to that interview step as opposed to just say, hey, I understand it. You've got some good info. We certainly are eager to hear that. You've shared a lot with us already. We're going to do this as an additional step just to hear directly from buyers.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that we will never turn down, and no organization should ever turn down, inputs about the marketplace, right? So if you're getting insights from your sales teams, you should absolutely listen to them, right? If you're getting information from your existing customers, you should absolutely be listening to that. If you're starting to use AI tools to understand what are your prospective buyers potentially, what's important to them, and what do they want to experience, have confidence buying from you, absolutely you should use those. They all have inherent downsides though, right? Because there's different reasons for it, right? Sales teams have a limited view of the market. They're only familiar with the customers they talk to. Doesn't mean they don't know anything about the market. Of course they know something about the market, but they're also not trained to look for patterns across a number of interviews to systematically and thoughtfully pull out what's most important to buyers. Is that what they're there to do, right? They're there to develop relationships with prospective buyers and give them all the information they need, which is what they do in a wonderful way. Recent buyers, the beauty of talking to them is it's completely unbiased insights, right? It's You're getting a full view of the marketplace. There's no bias at all in what you're getting from them. You're doing the research in such a way that you're looking for patterns in the data across all the interviews that you do, because you do a number of these interviews. And so that you really know at the end of these interviews what's truly important to the entire marketplace of buyers that you're targeting. And you can't get that from anything else. Like AI is an example. We talk a lot about AI. AI is a wonderful starting point, and we've run side-by-side tests where we've used AI to come up with the 5 rings of buying insights side by side. And what happens is, one of the problems is, or challenges is, AI is only able to access information that's available to it, right? A lot of this information you're getting from buyers just is not publicly available, right? Unless you have an in-depth interview with them and ask them all these questions they've never been asked before. It's just not publicly available, right? Companies aren't just going to put that out there. So that's one of the limitations. The other challenge with AI is using it as the sole source to develop a buyer persona is it tends to include everything in the kitchen sink, right? So it includes a lot of different... Is that better?
Oh, that is. There we go.
Sorry about that.
All right. So you were saying everything in the kitchen sink.
Right. Everything in the kitchen sink. And what we'll find is, AI may come up with, let's say, 12, 13 success factors as one of the rings of insight. We'll do buyer interviews and we'll find out, well, it's really 4, 5, or 6 that are truly important to them, right? So now by doing the buyer interviews, you avoid all that marketing waste by talking about these other things that really aren't truly important.
Let's talk about the importance of direct quotes, where people actually hear. You may not share the recording, so they may not hear the audio file of the voice, but they can read exactly what a buyer said about how they're making their decision. Why do you find that's such an important technique rather than just providing a synopsis?
Yeah, so when you develop your buyer persona, right, you're going to come up with your insights in each one of the 5 rings that we talked about. And one of the things to what you're referencing, Ed, is that you want to support each buying insight with buyer quotes. These are the things that are linked back to that insight, right? So, let's say, for example, one of the success factors might be we're trying to, improve operational efficiencies and improve accuracy, right? That's great. That's a very valuable insight. But if I just give you that insight with nothing else, it's kind of limiting. It can leave a lot to interpretation. It doesn't come across as maybe coming from the buyer per se. Right. If you have buyer quotes that support it, where you say, here's exactly what these different buyers said in your interviews, it does 2 things. Number one is it provides almost instant credibility for your findings, right? Because it's immediate almost. Like, it's usually the first page of the persona. If you're reviewing it with your internal audience, they'll see immediately like, hey, this is not what Buyer Persona Institute thinks, or it's not what you think. If you're presenting results and something that you did, this is what our buyers think. This is the buyer here. I always start off every presentation of a persona by saying, the star of the show today is your prospective buyers. It's not me. It's not you. The buyer is the star, and we're going to be maniacally focused on your prospective buyers today. Quotes have a wonderful way of making that real very quickly. The second really important thing that the quotes do is it helps you figure out how to communicate to buyers effectively, because now you're going to see exactly how they think about and how they talk about all these things that are important to them. So what ends up happening is it puts up guardrails on the tone and how you talk to them, right? How technical you might want to talk to them. You might be talking about a certain feature or benefit in a certain way and find out like, hey, they kind of refer to it this way all the time, right? Maybe it's a shortcut or a slang, or it's a more evolved way than you've been thinking. Now, all of a sudden, you can really align it, right? So it's not only the topics, but it's actually how you're talking to them.
So very specifically, the actual words that you're using.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So it's pretty cool. One of the things I always, when we do persona readouts, is we'll go through all the insights, et cetera, and we have a great discussion, and then I always, I don't demand it, but I strongly encourage it. I was like, when we share it was like, read the buyer quotes, read each and every one of these buyer quotes, because I guarantee you, when you are done reading through all of these, you are going to feel like one of your prospective buyers. You're going to feel them, right? And especially for content people and copywriters and everything, you won't be able to help but communicate better by doing that. So those buyer quotes are invaluable.
So, I mean, we're gradually trying to articulate the power of this, and that sounds like a really, really, really powerful piece of it.
Yep, absolutely.
Going back to the psychographic research, it often includes stuff like, maybe they watch CNN or they listen to podcasts or they do yoga or they use TikTok or whatever the case may be. Probably not relevant to complex professional buying decisions. And I think you may actually be a really good example of that. I mean, if we were going to do your profile, there'd be a lot about fitness and nutrition. It's a huge part of who you are as an individual. Right. Is that related to complex buying decisions that you make as part of your professional work, or is that just another element of your life?
For me, it's another element of my life, right? So it's interesting per se, but in my case, it would be like, well, why are we talking about this? That's really has nothing to do with my business per se. It's not that I don't care, right? Because it might be a passion of mine, right? Or for your prospective buyer, maybe you've identified a passion or something that is really important to them. But it's not going to really help when they're making this buying decision, particularly when it's for an organization and it's really important, right? Even if it's a personal decision. So we've been talking a lot of this in the context of B2B, but it's not just B2B, right? I mean, this framework works well for any high consideration buying decision. So picture, for an example, if, let's say you're buying a home, right? That's a complex buying decision, right?
Sure.
You're not doing it every day.
Hiring an investment advisor or something.
You're right. You're looking at multiple alternatives. You're darn right. You're going to be anxious about it. You're excited about it, right? But you don't want to make a bad choice, right? You don't want to find out like, oh my God, the foundation's crumbling, right? On day one that you move in there. So again, regardless of what my psychographics are as a person, what I care about is the house, right? Is it going to stand up? Is it going to have 3 bedrooms that I need, right?
Will it have a big enough gym?
A big enough gym. Yeah. For me, maybe that would be relevant. Okay. So yeah. So something I care about, but yeah, so it's not that it's not important. What I would say is kind of going back to what we talked about earlier is when you think about the buying decision that you're working on as a marketer and sales professional, sit down with a blank piece of paper, really, and just write down all the things that you think you really need to be able to market and sell to them effectively, and all the things that you're going to be doing from a marketing perspective, let's say, and just write it. Don't even look at anything. Just start writing them down, right? And that's a great start, because then all of a sudden now you're not just looking and asking for it. It's like, oh, yeah, we should have psychographics as part of this. Well, why? Is it relevant? If it is, great. But if it's not, then why waste your time?
Out of personal curiosity, as somebody who consistently struggles trying to manage my weight, how did you get into this? How did you develop that interest?
Yeah, so I was a proverbial skinny kid as a high schooler, right? So I was like, wow, how am I gonna gain a little weight? And and I just started. I found the gym one day, and I had some friends. We started working out, and I saw some results, and I just caught the bug type thing. And now I do it on the side. I have an online personal training business where I do training programs online so that people can follow them on their computer, right? So I don't have the time, unfortunately, to train most of them in person. Mm-hmm. I just love doing it because it's just a chance to help people in a very tangible way. And it's just really satisfying to see somebody achieve a goal that's really important to them. So it's just it's a great complement to kind of my day-to-day job. And it's something that I just know a lot about because I've been doing it for a long time. I just have a lot of interest in it. So hopefully when I retire from my day job, so to speak, it's something that I'll probably do a little bit more of.
And in terms of nutrition, any thoughts on this growing awareness or discussion about specific ingredients in our food that may have a negative metabolic impact on us? Is that something that you've spent time looking at?
A little bit, not as much as I probably should, to talk about it in a super informed way. I mean, the one thing I will say about nutrition is it's such an evolving field, right? And I think the people that have degrees in this stuff, the people that stay certified in this stuff, it's a never ending, it's like a lot of fields. Like it's so dynamic, it's so ever changing that you just have to keep tabs on stuff. I think also just having, I always tell my clients, just having an openness to things. Like do the research, right? You don't want to do like voodoo magic type stuff and harm yourself or something like that. But there's new insights coming out on things like nutrition all the time, and be open to it, but do your research.
Creatine?
Creatine has been very, very well researched. Probably one of the most researched drugs there are in terms of helping lifting performance. So I think creatine is definitely one of the things that gets a checkbox in terms of it's not for everybody, but if it's something where you're trying to gain strength or you're interested in hypertrophy where you're trying to grow muscle mass, I think creatine is definitely something you'd want to think about.
Got it. So obviously you've excelled in your research career. You've got significant credentials in fitness and nutrition. What's something else that you'd love to be equally expert at, but you just you haven't quite gotten there. You enjoy it. You wish you were super at it, but you're okay.
Golf, like probably a lot of us. Like I like golf quite a bit. It's one of those things that it's so difficult to do well and consistently that if you do it well, right, you hit that ball flush, you're like, wow, this is such a great feeling because the pros make it look so easy, right? I wish I had a little more time to play and get proficient at that. So that would be fun to invest some more time in that. So, but that's something I definitely enjoy doing.
Got it. All right. So kind of shifting back to the core theme of the conversation, you build this persona, you've got it done. Then what?
Yeah. So I've got two answers to this question when I get to answer. The first one is you're going to know some of the things, like there's nothing I can tell you. You're going to know what to do with it as a marketing or sales professional. You're going to have all these insights that are going to be so relevant in terms of help you do your job better, and you're going to figure it out, right? There's going to be things that you just do day to day where you're going to be like, well, we can use it for this, and we're going to have ideas for that. One of the things that we always recommend to do as a really good exercise is when you're done with the buyer persona, what's going to happen is you're going to have typically 30, 40, 50 buying insights, right? Pick a buying insight. Let's just define it as some insight you have about what your prospects want to know and experience, have confidence buying from you. So
across those 5 circles or 5 rings.
Across those 5 rings of buying insight, right? So, okay, great. We've got all these things. One of the great exercises to do, because it gets the organization on the same page, gets everybody aligned, and it also puts a very objective view on these insights so that you're not all of a sudden saying, hey, we got to meet this one and this one and this one, and you're off, you're on that hamster wheel, is to go through each one methodically. And for each buying insight, literally write down, and it's great to do this as a cross-functional team where you've got your sales, product, marketing, other folks involved. And you say, what are our capabilities against this particular buyer need? Right. So a simple example, let's say it's a technology solution, and IT security is a really important need that buyers said, hey, the solution's got to be secure, right?
Right.
So what are our capabilities when it comes to that? What can we say, right? So just list them very objectively. Don't think about value to the buyer. Don't think about how, is this different than my competitors? Just list them all out very objectively and spend some time doing that. And typically you could spend 3 or 4 hours doing that. Now you've got a whole list of what's important to buyers and what your capabilities are. That's fantastic, right? That's just great information to have.
Sure.
The next thing to do is to take each one of those capabilities and as objectively as you can, and there's some subjectivity to this, is give them 2 ratings. One, rate value to the buyer, like how valuable do you think this is to the buyer? Your buyer persona insights are going to help you do that. The second thing to do is give it a rating for how unique is it. So as an example, maybe there's a feature you have around IT security that is highly relevant to buyers, and you're the only one in the marketplace that can offer it, right? That's a huge competitive differentiation point. Conversely, it could be something that you offer, other competitors offer it, or it could be something that's a gap for you, right? But you want to do that, right? So now you've got buyer need, capability, value to the buyer, and differentiating ratings. From those
this
ratings,
is the process that you encapsulate, you call the messaging workshop, right?
Correct. You can do this in a workshop. And by doing these with a small team, objectively, you can now take these. And what's going to happen is you're going to have a set of buyer needs and capabilities that are going to have high value to the buyer ratings, hopefully high differentiation ratings. And you're going to probably come up with maybe 11, 12, 13 potentially different themes that are really important to buyers. What we'd encourage you to do is look at those and narrow it down to like 4, 5, or 6, right? 4 things that you say, you know what, these are things that A, we know buyers are going to care a heck of a lot about in their buyer's journey. And B, we've got a great story to tell because we've objectively gone through this and we know we've got capabilities to face off against that. Mm-hmm. And to make value proposition themes around each one of those, right? So let's use the IT security one. Maybe there's a whole value prop around IT security. Write messages around that. Develop your proof points around that. Maybe you've got 4 or 5, 6 capabilities. Here's some that are differentiating. Maybe you have metrics. Maybe you have customer success stories around all those things. Build those value prop themes. And then, what you can do with them is all different kinds of things, right? You can create content around them. Sales teams love these things, right? Because you can give them as conversation starters, right? Because now you're giving them, let's say it's 5 value prop themes. You're giving them something where you're saying, hey, we know that your buyers are going to care about, right. They may care about all these. They're definitely going to care about some of them. And oh, by the way, we've done all the work in terms of here's how you can talk about it in a really compelling way.
So incorporating them into the playbook.
Absolutely.
Now, obviously, your fingerprints with your career of buyer research are on this latest edition of the book, too, because you talk about using buyer research as a supplement. So you've got a number of unique capabilities that have been identified that are important to buyers, but which is the most important? Which moves the needle? And you go through a bunch of different methodologies of ways to use research. How often do you find companies, particularly small to mid-sized companies that may not have large budgets and internal research teams, how often do you find folks actually doing some of that follow-on quantitative research to supplement the qualitative buyer persona?
It depends. So what you're referencing is one of the chapters that we added to this book, and part of it is because of my experience in research, is doing quantitative survey research following your buyer persona. So if you build a buyer persona, doing these in-depth 30 to 40-minute interviews that are discussions really, some organizations want a little bit more confidence that this is projectable to their marketplace. One of the ways to do that is to survey more buyers. And by a survey, all I simply meaning is, and I'm sure everybody's done a survey before, it's it's questions that you get where you're ranking something, you're rating it on a scale of 1 to 10, you're selecting, here's the most important from a list of different things, right? And what you do with it is you can interview more buyers that way, more economically, right? You can do online surveys and things of that nature. And it's a great way to basically say, hey, look, these are, we're taking all these initial interviews and we're really trying to make sure that they're relevant and accurate for our market. The good news is every time we do this, we find that they are. So that's the good news. The second thing that you can really powerful way that you can use survey research to supplement the buyer persona core research is to really identify things that are more important, right? So let's say the second ring of insight is success factors, right? Those, you remember, those are the outcomes that buyers want. By doing survey research, there's techniques you can use to say like, all right, I found 7 success factors. Survey research will actually help you figure out what is the most important or which is the 1 or 2 most important. And these other ones are also important. So we're not saying ignore those, but if you have limited budget or you're really trying to double down on something, here's the 1 or 2 that you should really focus on. And that's
but not only stack rank, but also magnitude of importance. So it's relative, but it's more absolute as well.
Yeah. So there's different research techniques that are pretty easy for respondents, for participants to fill out. And you can use different statistical techniques that help you literally measure the order of magnitude to your point. So those are cool things. And we find it really depends on who we work with. There's some organizations that they always want to do the quantitative research for those 2 reasons I just mentioned. There's others that have done this and they've seen that, hey, the 90% of the value we're getting is from the core buyer persona research, so we'll stick with that, either because of resources or they just feel like this is good enough, right? And that's fine too.
And another place to use it, I think, would be as you create the messaging. If you've got 4 or 5 different marketing copies around a particular capability that you know is important to buyers, you could use some research to see which of those are particularly resonant, right?
Exactly. So it's basically, message testing, right? So anybody in marketing has probably seen some form of message testing, and there's different ways to do it, but it's a way to take the insights, actually draft and develop draft messages, and then actually take it to survey research to help you figure out, what are the ones that are going to resonate best, or you'll get learnings that'll say, hey, we're seeing some threads here across different messages. Maybe we need to kind of combine some of these in some different ways, right? So it can definitely help you there as well.
So you make a compelling case that as the cross-functional teams digest the persona, they just kind of fall in line because it's so compelling. But I got to think that sometimes there's pushback. How do you handle that?
We don't get a ton of pushback. When we do get pushback, I would say the biggest thing that helps is the buyer quotes that I mentioned before, right? Because now it's, you can argue and debate it if you want, right? I mean, that's fine to do, but the main thing is the interviews. Let's just talk about the interviews for a minute, because this is probably an important point and it actually gets to your question. The way to do the interviews, not the surveys, but the initial interviews where you're literally talking to buyers for 30, 40 minutes is you're going to these interviews as a blank slate. Like you have you want to have any agenda at all. You don't want to go in with any preconceived notions. You want to go in as this buyer I'm about to talk to for the next 34 minutes has a story to tell. They have a story to tell about what was important and all the different steps that was taken in their organization to make this buying decision. My job as the interviewer is to get that story out of them, right? We almost think of ourselves as journalists more than researchers, right? Where we're really just trying to say like, look, if you think about some of the great interviewers, right? Whether it's on 60 Minutes or something like that, they just know They ask good questions. They probe at the right place. Like they don't take the first answer. They'll say, hey, tell me a little bit more about that. What did you mean by that? Right. And that's where you get a lot of the answers. So the beauty of doing this kind of interview is you start at the initial trigger point. So you literally want to know, one of the first things we say to them is, take me back to the day when you first decided you needed X, and X would be the product or service, and tell me what happened. We started.
In fact, that's the
broad.
Single scripted question of the entire interview.
Exactly. We started that broad. We do it for a reason. Number one, to send a signal to them that, hey, look, we're not going to be jamming aided questions down your throat. We're really here to understand this, right? From there, we start to peel back the onion. So we'll say to them, hey, what was the initial reason you even started looking for this solution? You even started looking at competitors, right? And they'll give us some answers, and we'll say, tell me a little bit more about that, right? Then we'll get to success factors and say, hey, there's probably some outcomes or some things you guys were really looking to achieve. Can you tell me a little bit about what those were? We'll ask them, we'll probe, right? They may say, oh, we want to improve efficiencies. Oh, tell me a little bit more about improving efficiencies. What do you mean by that? Like, why is that important? In what context, right? You get all those type of things. The reason I'm telling you all this is because what happens is, when you're done with the interviews, they're irrefutable, right? There's no bias involved. They're not, if we're doing the interviews for helping you with them, for example, there's no agenda, right? We're not talking about a product or service, right? We're talking about this buying decision that you went through. It comes across in the buyer quotes immediately, right? You can see that it's like literally it's just them talking about this
Makes sense.
buying decision, right? So that usually squashes any pushback. In fact, I can't remember a persona readout we've been on where I've had anybody push back.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
That's a very strong statement for the methodology. Yeah. Now, it's fascinating because what you just took us through was essentially a masterclass in consultative sales. That's exactly what great salespeople would be doing. But my sense is that marketing owns this process, and often more disinterested people, and sometimes an outside firm like yours. Who should own it? And how do you know if you can do it internally or if you should bring in somebody from outside?
It can be owned either way, right? I mean, I think there's definitely a benefit. This sounds self-serving, but it's not. I do think there's a benefit having a third party do it, whether it's us or somebody else do the interviews, because there's a certain expertise in doing these interviews. If you do them, there's a certain way to do them and not do them to get those objective insights.
Right.
You also have a better chance of getting the unvarnished truth. If you're not representing an organization, because nobody's afraid that, I'm going to call them. If I do an interview, then nobody's afraid I'm going to call them and try to sell them something the next day. Like, that's off the table.
Right.
type thing. So I think, but the hardest part probably is finding recent buyers, right? Because earlier we talked about, you don't want to just talk to your current customers. It's better than nothing, but you got to talk to buyers that didn't even consider you or considered you and chose somebody else. Mm-hmm. And there's a way to go about doing that to find those type of buyers. And we work with third-party recruiting firms that are really good at it. And then we have screening questionnaires that we use to qualify people for the interviews, more importantly, to disqualify them, because there's two hoops you have to jump through to talk to us in a study. One is your organization, if it's B2B, had to make this buying decision in the last 3 to 12 months. And number two, you, the individual, had to be heavily involved in this buying decision. And we almost torture you in our screening questionnaire to make sure that you can jump through those two hoops. And still, we'll get on a call and we'll find that somebody really isn't as qualified as they thought they were. And we typically just disqualify them. But there's a rigor and a process to find those recent buyers. And if you don't do that well, it's the foundation of the house. Everything falls apart, right? You're not getting the stuff that you really need to make your buyer persona sing.
So there's those you won, those you lost, those who you didn't know about, who bought from a competitor, but also you mentioned earlier, the fourth group, those who ended in no decision, like we talked about earlier, everyone dreads, right?
Yep, absolutely. You can definitely include those. And sometimes we include the no decision, sometimes we don't. We always like to, and we typically do more often than not, unless one of the companies we're working with just would rather not. So it's a choice.
How many personas does a company need?
It depends, really. You're probably not going to do a buyer persona if you're a large global organization, for example, and you have many products and service solutions. You're not going to do a buyer persona for every one. We typically try to give guidance to companies. We say, focus your buyer personas on buying decisions or your product or service that either A is something that's new, where you really just don't have a lot of insights about your buyers at all, or maybe it's a new market that you don't have a lot of understanding about, Or it could be something where, going into the next 12 months, for example, your next fiscal year, that there's definitive plans to really make a push here, right? Where you're going to really be doing some things on the marketing and sales side. That's another great place to make the investment. The other place I'll often suggest to clients is focus on things where you can really make some changes, right? So if you've got this mature product and it's humming along and you realize that there's not going to be a lot of tolerance to make changes in your marketing and sales processes and how you're communicating, maybe don't focus on that. Focus on something that where you say, hey, look, we're going to make some investments here. We've got some flexibility to make some changes, or this is brand new. Because then you're just going to get a lot more value from the research investment.
So many companies in the space where this audience comes from are being courted and purchased by private equity. Have you seen any sponsors use this in due diligence to understand the opportunity with a potential acquisition?
Yes, directly and indirectly, we have seen that do that as being a use case for it. So it's uncommon, but we have seen it.
All right, so we got to talk about AI. I think you mentioned earlier some people may be tempted to just try to have AI do the persona for them. So clearly that's not a best practice. The interviews are recorded. So you mentioned in the book the possibility of just pasting the interview transcripts into an LLM and have that kind of extract the insights for you. But you make a strong case for why reading it and highlighting the quotes and manually extracting those is important. Help us reiterate why that's important, if you would.
Yeah. So just to kind of, there's two places you could use AI really for your buyer personas, right? There's the input and the output piece, just to try to simplify this. The input piece is where are you getting the raw data, for lack of a better word, that's going to develop your buyer persona. We would encourage you to do the buyer interviews, right? If you want to use AI to use it, we're not going to say that's a bad thing to do or it's going to give you crummy results. We're not going to make, because it all depends, right? It depends on a whole host of things to make that statement. But I can tell you with 100%.
Except it could hallucinate parts of your persona.
Yeah, it could do things. All right. So I don't want to be an alarmist, but I will say that if you talk to buyers and do these type of interviews, you're going to be on rock solid foundation, right? They're irrefutable, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you know where the data is coming from, and they're coming from the buyers that you're specifically targeting. There's no outside noise coming in, right? So that's number one. But where you can really use AI to help is if you're doing only doing one or two buyer personas, where let's say, for the given year, you're going to do a buyer persona on key product or service you're focused on. I would encourage you to, record them, transcribe the interviews, and manually look for patterns in the data. And the reason that we encourage you to do that is because just by doing that process, you're going to understand buyers so much better, right? Just by doing that own thinking yourself.
Sure.
If you're doing multiple buyer personas where this is something you've really kind of embraced and you've got a whole litany of them, AI is a great way to efficiently analyze some of those transcripts, right? And there's all kind, we're not going to get into prompt engineering in here. We have different queries that we like that we're playing around with and constantly evolving. But you can load up the transcripts as an example for a buyer persona study and do some really great queries to get some quick insights. So it could be something as simple as, tell me what are the top challenges that are causing buyers to look for this type of solution, right?
All right.
And if you're doing a whole host of buyer personas and you need a more efficient way to go through that, you can do that. Or if you've done multiple buyer personas, maybe across different products or services, and there's linkages between them. So let's say you've got, you sell marketing software, right? And you have different modules of marketing software that do different things. You could take all the transcripts and you could use AI to help you identify what are some common things that are important to buyers across this portfolio, right? So there's all different things you can do. So I would just say AI is a great tool to use as a way to efficiently do some things that might be more useful to you. That would be the main place I would use it. But if you have the time and you're not doing a ton of buyer personas, and you can really dig into the transcripts, that's a great exercise to do.
So I've seen some interesting chatter around building a custom GPT for a persona and feeding the interviews, feeding the persona output into that custom GPT to basically make that custom GPT your persona, and then using that to propose specifically tailored messaging and gauge reactions to certain questions or messaging. Have you seen folks doing that effectively?
Yeah, we're actually messing around with things like that right now, and it is something that we have to explore, right? So I have seen organizations mess around with that a little bit, and it really depends on how you're doing it. Like there's an art and science to using AI, and you just have to make sure that you're doing it the right way. Like, are you training the data the proper way? Are you putting the right guardrails, right? Are you accounting for hallucinations? So yeah, I think it's a wonderful opportunity. One of the things that we're working on right now, we're not offering it yet to our clients, but we will be in the coming months, is a custom chatbot with their persona.
Cool.
So that not only do they get the buyer persona, which is all the insights in the buyer quotes, but now they've got, and we'll train it ahead of time with the actual data so that they can go in and just query it themselves, right? So it's like, I don't have to go to the PowerPoint persona, for example. I can go in here and just type in this thing, and I know it's sourced on reliable data and data that's already been trained a bit. So that's one of the things we're working on right now.
Yeah, that's really cool. That's a great enhancement. So people can turn to the book. They can go to buyerpersona.com, the website. There's rich resources there. You've got your LinkedIn newsletter, although it looks like you may have been focused on other things more recently, but Buyer Persona Buzz is that LinkedIn newsletter. What other resources do you recommend for folks that are intrigued and want to either jump in or gradually kind of acclimatize themselves to these ideas and think about whether they want to do them?
Yeah, so I guess the two places are our website, which is buyerpersona.com. We have a number of resources out there. On there, we have templates. We have our master's class. So for DIYers, if they want to take a class to learn how to do all this stuff themselves, we have videos up there about exactly how to do buyer personas and then how to actually do value prop and messaging creation with those personas. That's all available on the website. And then on LinkedIn, I'm constantly putting content out now on LinkedIn, either through the newsletter or really more importantly, like daily now I try to put out video snippets and things of that nature just to talk about some of these concepts. So I would encourage anybody just to connect or follow me. And I try to be as participatory on LinkedIn as I can, right? So if people want to engage, I'll definitely engage with them. So I would say those two resources are great ones.
And where do you turn for contemporary and thought-provoking insights on B2B marketing and sales? Are there blogs or podcasts or YouTube channels that you follow?
There's a number. I try to listen to as many podcasts. I don't want to mention any specific podcasts. There's a number that podcasts that I try to listen into. My focus typically is I try to listen to a good equilibrium of marketing, sales content, and also market research content, because it's really kind of the mix of those three things is where we live day in, day out on the B2B side. So it's a mix of different things. And I try to read as well and try to find books that people recommend. The marketing book podcast is a great one too. That's a place where a lot of times I'll go to.
Unfortunately, it's done. And I think everything comes down off the web in another 6 months or something like that.
Yeah, we were so Adele on the first book was on that. And we had the great fortune of being one of the last, the second edition. We were one of the last podcasts they did. They waited for us. So that was pretty cool.
And for folks that are intrigued by the fitness and nutrition aspect of your expertise, any podcast or book or blog resources you recommend there?
Oh gosh. I don't have a specific recommendation because I listen to so many people. I listen to a lot of different things. Quite honestly, there's a lot of garbage stuff out there fitness wise. So I usually stick with people that have had longevity and are almost science-based in everything that they're doing, and not just from a nutritional standpoint, but they really understand physiology well. They understand body mechanics very well, because you're just going to learn a ton from those people. So there are a number of good ones out there, and you just kind of have to parse out some of the crap that you see. So
one of the interesting things at the intersection, I guess, of psychographics and persona, as I'm hearing you talk, you're very heavily focused on podcasts. You keep talking about listening. So I assume that means YouTube or podcast is where you're accessing a lot of the information flow that you're consuming these days. Is that correct?
Yeah, podcast is definitely a place that I try to listen into, because you can take them with you, or if you're in your car or you're doing a workout or whatever, it's a place that you can kind of listen into stuff. And I don't know, I'm probably like a lot of people where I spend a lot of time on my computer, and it's just nice sometimes to kind of unplug and just try to listen, right? Listen to actually somebody talk, and you pick up inflection points and nuance, and people come up with things that they're really passionate about that you really want to pay attention to, because they really mean it, right? It's something you can tell it's a lesson that they learned in a good way, and you want to really pick up on what that is.
Right. So we're recording this in December. It's going to publish probably around the time that many New Year's resolutions are being forgotten. Any, from the fitness and nutrition perspective, any advice, anything you can say to get people to just kind of hold on tight and stick with it?
Yeah, I would say I often get asked on the fitness side, like, what's the secret sauce and all this? And I always tell people, like, if you watched me work out, you'd be bored out of your mind. Like, it's not the variation, right? You don't need to keep flipping your workouts and saying, oh, I'm going to try this month, and then I get bored and do this. I am so boringly consistent, but that is the secret sauce. Like, whatever, if you try to get to the gym 2, 3, 4 times, or you're working out in your home, or you're doing some type of program, just don't miss. Just stick with it. If you miss a certain day, pick it up the next day. It's not the end of the world, right? So consistency is the secret sauce. And it's not always glamorous. Sometimes it's going to be boring, but just do it. The best feeling in the world is walking out when you're done with a workout. Nobody's ever in a bad mood, right? So that's kind of like the carrot I always have in my mind. Like, I'm going to feel really good.
Especially if you push through a whole bunch of excuses about why you didn't need to be there and you did it anyway.
Yep. And it definitely helps you mentally too, right? It's a great way just to kind of to decompress, either at the beginning or at the end of the day, for example, if that's when you get your workouts in.
So you mentioned LinkedIn. Folks can connect you with on LinkedIn. How else can they reach out to you?
I would say the website is probably the best place, because if you reach out there, we have a bunch of contact us buttons. So if you hit one of those, it's going to get to me and my colleagues. So we're always very proactive, trying to get back to people that are looking for any type of advice or assistance. To keep it simple, I would say those 2 places are probably the best. And then I do podcasts fairly frequently as well, or I try to, across the broad cross range of marketing, sales, and products. So you might see me another podcast as well. Plug into that as well. If anything we talked about today is interesting.
All right, and describe the ideal company, ideal client. Who should think about just reading the book? Who should think about your DIY class? Who should think about engaging your firm? Do you have any rules of thumb for size or some attributes that would help them know where they fit best?
Yeah, I don't think it has anything to do with size. I think it's, if you are selling what I'm defining as a high consideration product or service, right, where it's something that buyers are going to take some time to make a decision. They're going to look at different competitive alternatives. There may be a buying committee involved. They're going to be worried about making the wrong decision as much as the right decision. Whether it's B2B or B2C, these type of personas, whether it's done DIY or partnering with a firm like ours, and if you have fundamental questions where you're working on marketing and sales, and you have real fundamental questions about how to best connect and break through the clutter with your buyers in a really highly relevant way, that I can guarantee you that this type of work that we've been talking will be immensely valuable to you. And it won't be a 2-day value. It's going to be something you're going to go back to again and again. So for anybody that describes.
Any company selling capital equipment or complex sales that thinks that somehow they don't struggle to break through the clutter is, I'd say, naive. I mean, basically, you're describing any company in business today. That's just the reality of it.
You should not be guessing at this stuff. There's literally no reason to guess it. Make the investment in it, and it will pay off, right? And because it's going to eliminate. Think about all the marketing and sales waste you're going to eliminate doing this stuff, right? You're going to stop doing some things. The things that you're doing, you're going to do better. So you're going to your ROI for your investment is going to go up exponentially.
Yeah, that's a great point. Okay, as we wrap up, give us a couple minutes packing this whole conversation into a consolidated pitch. Why should a middle market industrial manufacturer go through this process? Why do the insights matter? Why are they different than just asking the sales team, what they hear?
I think number one, it's going to align your entire organization around one source of buyer truth. There's going to be no quibbling. There's going to be no anecdotal, oh, this person said this, that person said that. You're going to have one highly credible, robust source of buying insights that everybody is going to trust. So you'll be able to rally and all kind of go in the same direction because of it. That's one of the ththings I enjoy the most about this work, is you see that happening literally when you actually go through the buyer persona. You're going to increase your qualified leads. You're going to have more people, and the right people look at you, because you're going to be talking to them very early on and throughout the buying journey in a way that's very meaningful to them. You're going to help convert more business, right? Because you're going to equip your sales teams to really become trusted advisors and give them all the information and insights they need to do their jobs really well. And you're going to help their buyers, and you're going to have more satisfied buyers, right? They're going to buy your products and services, and they're going to be more satisfied because it's going to help you get that right fit, right? Where it's the virtual win-win type of thing. And the thing that we just mentioned, which is one of the things I love, is think about all the marketing waste that you can eliminate by just being really focused on the things that are really going to make a difference and executing the heck out of them, right? Because you're so aligned with your buyers,
right?
So if that's not compelling enough, I'm not sure I can sell anybody on it, but they're pretty cool. Oh, and maybe the last thing is this is not a short-term type of investment. I mean, unless you are in a market that is really, really dynamic and ever changing, this is an investment in time and resources that's going to pay off for several years, probably.
Got it. Great recap. Fascinating conversation. Thank you so much for your time and for joining me, Jim.
Thanks, Ed. I really appreciate it. Had fun.
So everyone listening, drop your comments below. If you got questions for Jim, if you got questions for me, be sure to like, share, comment. You know the drill. And by all means, please also subscribe to this podcast and do be sure to share it with your colleagues. So thanks for joining Jim Kraus and me for this episode of the Industrial Growth Institute podcast and for tuning in for the next one.